I thought the marriage had died quietly, until I found a forgotten notebook with everything he never had the courage to say. Confessions of love, betrayal, pain, and a secret that would completely change the way she saw the last 12 years of her life. But what Clara didn't know is that there was another revelation waiting for her, something that her ex-husband kept hidden until the end, and that would come at the hands of a child with a name she would never forget. Get ready for one of the most moving stories you've ever heard. A journey of forgiveness, belated truths, and rebuilding what seemed lost forever. Leave your like, comment on what touched you the most, and share it with someone who also needs to hear this story. Subscribe to the channel for more real, touching, and unforgettable stories. When you live with someone for 12 years, it's not a timeline filled with dates and events. It's a tangle of smells, noises, silences, expressions, and small repetitions that become invisible until they disappear. That's how it was with Henrique. One day, he was sprawled on the couch with that crooked look of someone who never gets settled. The next, there was only the sunken mark in the cushion and an absence so glaring it gave me a headache. The letter arrived on a rainy afternoon, tucked into a forgotten blue folder at the back of the hallway closet. It hadn't been sent by post, nor had it been left with some dramatic note. It was a thin notebook with a crooked spine and pages already beginning to yellow. On it, in tiny letters, was written, "Things I've never said." I thought it was some kind of work note, or another one of his endless lists of tasks he never completed. Henrique had a habit of listing everything: groceries, New Year's resolutions, books he hadn't read. But this list was different. It was about me, about us, and about everything he kept to himself, while our marriage slowly and silently fell apart. In the first few pages, he wrote as if he were still trying to understand what had happened. "Clara, if you ever read this, I want you to know that it was never for lack of love, but I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own home. I read it sitting on the cold floor, among shoeboxes and bags of souvenirs from trips that no longer meant anything. Each word seemed to spark a forgotten memory. You stopped smiling at me at breakfast, and I started leaving earlier. You talked to the plant on the porch more sweetly than you did to me. You used to listen to me, but you stopped listening to me." With each line, I felt a part of my chest sink. It was like watching the end of our marriage in slow motion, but from an angle I had never noticed before. It wasn't just what he didn't say. It was also what I never asked. I stopped reading when my eyes started to burn. I dropped the notebook on the living room table, but it seemed to be pulsing, as if those words had been waiting for me for a long time. I called my sister, but hung up before calling her. I didn't want to explain. I didn't even know what I was feeling. Was it anger, guilt, sadness, a paralyzing mix of all three? That night, I dreamed about Henrique. We were sitting in the car, like so many times before, stopped at the traffic light on Avenida Central. But in the dream, he turned to me and said, "Did you know I used to cry in the supermarket parking lot?" I woke up with my heart racing and my mouth dry. I remembered the time I found a tissue wrapper in the car, and he said it was the flu. I got up. I took the notebook. I went back to reading. Page 18. "When you lost the baby, I wanted to cry with you, but you closed yourself off so much, Clara. I was afraid to invade your pain, so I cried in the bathroom, alone, and I never talked about it again. My body froze. I always thought he had been cold, distant, that he didn't care about that pain. I never knew that. I never heard him say anything, and I never asked if he had suffered too." The list went on, and each item was a punch, an open scar, a piece of our history that I had forgotten, or distorted, or simply erased. Page 23. "I still remember the day you danced in the living room in just your socks. You laughed out loud, with wine in your hand. I fell in love all over again at that moment, and I thought, there is still salvation, but you never noticed that I was looking at you." Page 26. "I lied when I said that birthday dinner was great. I burned the sauce. I wanted you to ask me why I was so quiet, but you just smiled and went to watch your show." Page 30. When I took that job in another city, I wanted you to say no. I wanted you to fight. I wanted you to say you wanted to be with me, but you just said, do what's best for you. And I went. I closed the notebook. I felt a lump in my throat, as if something had broken completely. It was no longer just a marriage that had ended. It was an entire story of things left unsaid, of lost glances, of silences that had screamed for years, and that now, too late, were all there, written by hand. But I still didn't know that the worst was yet to come. I set the notebook down on the kitchen table and stared at it like a wild animal about to spring. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. Each page felt like it carried more weight than I could bear. But deep down, a part of me knew I had to finish reading it. It was the only way I would understand what had really happened between us. The marriage didn't end suddenly. It fell apart silently, word by word, absence by absence. During the day, I tried to distract myself. I put on music. I made coffee. I swept the entire house even though there was no visible dirt. But nothing could shake off that feeling. I was living with a ghost, and his name was Henrique. Not a scary ghost, but the kind that haunts you with memories too good to ignore and pains too old to resolve. Late in the afternoon, I sat down on the couch and pulled the notebook back onto my lap. My hands were shaking. Page 34. Clara. When I started writing this list, I thought I was trying to justify myself. But now I realize I just wanted to tell you everything I've been holding back for years. I was screaming on the inside, and you were smiling on the outside. It was like living on different frequencies. We were listening to the same music, but we were dancing out of step. The words had a strange echo. They hurt more than any argument we'd ever had. Because they were true. Because they hadn't been said out loud when there was still time to hear. Page 39. I felt like a guest in our room. As if that space had stopped being mine when you started sleeping with your back turned. I tried to touch you so many times, but your silence was colder than any winter. And then came a confession. Page 41. I cheated on you. It was just once. It didn't last more than one night. I was drunk, lost, feeling invisible. She didn't even know my real name. But when I came home and saw you sleeping, hugging the pillow I gave you on our 3rd anniversary, I cried in the bathroom like a coward. I never looked at her again. I never cheated again. But I also never had the courage to tell her. And that ate me up inside. I froze. It hit me like a concrete wall. I felt my body stiffen. My mind started spinning in circles. Part of me wanted to rip out those pages, tear them up, burn them. Another part of me just thought, was it just a one-time thing? There were never any clues. I never suspected. And that was the cruelest part. He kept it as well hidden as everything else. The man who had slept beside me for years was a stranger full of smothered truths. And now, even in his absence, he was opening wounds I hadn't even known I had. I closed the notebook once more, and for the first time since the divorce, I actually cried. It wasn't a beautiful cinematic cry, the kind where tears flow slowly. It was an ugly cry, a sob that was held back. Anger mixed with sadness, with regret, and with a kind of love that was still there, but didn't know where to hide. I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency session. I needed to talk. I needed to vomit everything that Henrique didn't have the courage to say out loud. And maybe, just maybe, understand why I had also been silent for so long. That night, I sat on the porch, the same porch where he said I spoke to the plant more affectionately than to him, and I found myself apologizing to the plant. How crazy. But maybe deep down, I was apologizing to him. I picked up the notebook again. My hand hesitated, but opened it. Page 46. You called me my safe haven, but I felt like a broken raft, always on the verge of sinking. I wanted to be your shelter, Clara, but in the end, I was just another place where you hid from the life that hurt you. Page 48. When your mother got sick, I wanted to be strong, but I didn't know how. I was raised not to show weakness. I thought that staying silent would be respecting her pain, but today I understand that silence was abandonment. Page 49. You would ask me, do you still love me? And I would say yes as a reflex. but inside I wanted to say, yes, but I'm tired of screaming inside myself, and you not listening. I closed my eyes. I slumped in my chair. His words weren't love letters. They were rubble. And here I was, trying to rebuild an emotional house that had already been torn down long before the breakup. When I returned to my room, I noticed one last folded sheet of paper at the bottom of the notebook. It was taped shut. Trembling, I carefully peeled it off. On the back was written, "If you ever feel like you can forgive me, look me up. I still live in the same place." And then, something inside me broke completely. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay on my side, staring at the ceiling as if it might answer me. The last sentence I read repeated in my mind like a silent drum. "If you ever feel like you can forgive me, look for me. I still live in the same place." But forgive what, exactly? The betrayal? The silence? Or the fact that he'd left me with so many questions and no chance of a straight answer? The next day, instead of going straight to work, I took a different route. An impulse made me turn left at the 18th Street roundabout, the old route I used to take when I came back from the market with Henrique. It was as if my feet knew where to go before I even thought about it. I passed in front of the building where we lived together, the same building where he still lived, according to the letter. I parked across the street. I sat there in the car, with the engine off and my sweaty hands on the steering wheel. The third-floor apartment had a porch light on. The plants were there, the same ones I had planted myself. I wondered if he cared for them, or if they were just alive out of stubbornness. My heart was beating so loudly that I almost didn't notice when my phone vibrated. It was a message from my therapist, confirming the session time for the next day. But what I really wanted was to confirm if I still had a place in that story that Henrique wrote by himself. I went home without knocking on his door. I wasn't ready. Not yet. But that afternoon, I sat down with my notebook on my lap and began writing my own list. Things I never told Henrique. Page 1. When you hugged me after the ultrasound and told me everything was going to be okay, I didn't believe you. But I pretended I did, because I needed some illusion to keep me going. Page 3. I desired you less often than I should have, and I blamed you for that, when in reality it was my body that was disconnected from my soul. I didn't know how to feel beautiful anymore. Page 5. I noticed when you arrived later smelling of another perfume, but I didn't have the strength to face it. I preferred to pretend it was just my imagination. Writing hurt, but it was a strangely necessary pain, like cleaning an old wound that never quite healed. I kept going for hours. I wrote about nights I cried in the shower, about times I lied and said everything was fine, about how scared I was of becoming a statistic, of being just another woman in a failed marriage. When I closed the notebook, it was already past 10 at night. I went to the kitchen, made some tea, and sat in the dark, with only the streetlight coming through the window. It was then that I heard a noise at the door, an envelope being pushed from underneath. I almost dropped my heart. I ran. I grabbed the envelope. The name Clara was written in his handwriting. Inside, a single folded sheet with 2 sentences. I've imagined this moment so many times, but I never thought I'd still be afraid to see you. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing. It was Henry. He knew I had gone there. Or someone told him. Or he felt it. But he knew. And now, I had let his fear slip through the crack in my door, just as I had let mine slip through the pages of my notebook. Deep down, I knew what was coming next. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare me for the revelation that was on the last page of his list. The page that was still glued, hidden deep inside the back cover, sealed with double-sided tape. The page I wasn't supposed to find, but I found it. It took me 2 days to touch the notebook again. It sat there, on the dresser, like a living presence. Sometimes, when I walked past the room, I swore I could hear that hidden piece of paper breathing. The double-sided tape stuck to the back cover seemed to pulse. I knew that when I opened it, something would change. Something would leave the realm of hypotheses and enter the flesh. On the 3rd morning, before the sun had even risen, I sat on the edge of my bed with the notebook in my lap. My fingers hesitated, but carefully broke the seal of the ribbon. Inside, folded in 4, was a final handwritten page, in ink newer than the rest. Henry had probably written it shortly before he left home, and the first line stopped me in my tracks. "I know what you did, Clara." My stomach turned. The blood seemed to drain from my fingers. I repeated the sentence aloud, trying to give it a different tone. But there was no ambiguity. It was direct, raw, full of something I didn't yet understand. I kept reading, my heart beating like a siren in my chest. "That night, when you said you were working late, I went to your office. I saw the lights off, the parking lot empty, and Tiago's car parked 2 streets away with your scarf on the front seat. Tiago, a name I hadn't heard in years, a mistake I held so deeply that sometimes I even forgot it existed. It was a one-time thing, a moment of fragility, an emotional despair mixed with anger, abandonment, and need. Henrique never mentioned it. He never confronted me, and I, cowardly, never confessed. Continue reading. I didn't leave you back then because I thought I didn't have the morals to do that either. But at that moment, something inside me died, something that may never have come back. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. The tears came violently. That page, that last page, it wasn't a settling of accounts. It was an open wound that he preferred to keep quiet for years. And now, he threw it into my hands like a silent bomb. Why did he never say anything? Why did he carry this without looking me in the eyes? Why did he wait until everything was over to finally spit out this truth? I started reading again. The betrayal I committed years later was not the beginning of the end. It was just a reflection of the emptiness that was already between us. I loved you, Clara. But the truth is that, on that day, I lost my best friend, and I was never able to find her again. I felt like I had been slapped. Hard, cold, deserved. I spent years feeling like a victim, accusing Henrique of being distant, cold, silent. But I was too. I also closed myself off. I also made choices that hurt, and that I never had the courage to face. I left the sheet on the bed. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who didn't recognize herself. A woman who finally understood why her marriage ended, and she had no one else to blame, but the two of us. That afternoon, I wrote a new letter. It wasn't a reply. It was a continuation. A chapter that needed to exist, even if no one read it. Henrique, I have no excuses. I have wounds. I have regrets. I have silences that now scream inside me. I put the letter in an envelope and went to the building. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart in my throat. When I reached his door, I took a deep breath and knocked. Once, twice, 3 times, but no one answered. I put the envelope in the mailbox and went downstairs, trying to hold back the tears. As I walked out the door of the building, I heard the doorman's voice calling me. "Dona Clara, he's not here anymore. He moved a few days ago. Didn't they tell you?" I froze. My mouth went dry. "Where did he go?" She hesitated. "He said he was going to his parents' house in the countryside, but he seemed kind of determined, you know? Like someone who doesn't intend to go back." I stood there for long minutes, in the middle of the sidewalk, holding my bag as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. Henry was gone. This time, for real. But he left something behind, and I still had no idea what I was about to find at the bottom of the last box he left in the closet of our old bedroom. The box had been there since the move, stacked among old books, sheets that no longer matched anything, and papers that probably should have been thrown away. It was a gray box, unmarked, unlabeled. One of those boxes where you don't even know where it came from. I only noticed its presence when I decided to clean out the old guest room, now transformed into a storage room for the remains of our life together. I pulled the box out on impulse, thinking it was just another one of files or old stuff, but it was heavier than it looked. And when I opened it, I knew immediately. This wasn't a forgotten place. It was a hiding place. Right at the top, a photo of us, from the time when we still laughed in the middle of the street over silly things. I was wearing a yellow dress, and he had disheveled hair, holding my face with both hands, as if the world were just me. Behind the photo, a dedication. If you ever forget what we were like, come back here." My heart sank. I kept rummaging through it. I found old letters we had exchanged when we were still dating. A travel diary with scribbled plans we never made. A photo frame with no photo, but a note. This space was for our daughter. I was paralyzed. Enrique never mentioned keeping anything from that time. He never mentioned the idea of having a daughter after what happened. I always thought he had buried it along with our mourning. But there it was, the empty space, the symbol of the absence that haunted us for years. Underneath the picture frame, a sealed red envelope. And on it, just one sentence. "For Clara, in case I leave for good." His hands were shaking. The air felt thin. I opened the envelope with almost religious care. What I read next took my breath away. "Clara, if you're reading this, it's because I left without being able to tell you everything, even after trying. Maybe I was wrong to keep so much to myself. Maybe you were also wrong to pretend you didn't see it. But what hurts me the most, what burns me inside, is not having told you about her." I stopped. My eyes darted to the previous note. About her? I went back to the letter. 2 years after our separation, I met a girl in the countryside. She looked at me the way you looked at me when it was just the two of us, in the beginning. It wasn't passion. It was something purer, a connection. Clara, she was my daughter. A buzzing sound filled my ears. The text began to tremble in front of me. I read it again, and again. She wasn't my daughter by blood, but she was a child who chose me, a 5-year-old girl who lived next door to my mother, and who every day sat at the gate and called me Uncle Reek. At first it was just a joke, then it became routine. And one day, when she hugged me saying she wanted a father like me, I couldn't stay away any longer. Her mother let me in, let me take care of her. Clara, she gave me what life took from us, without guilt, without pain. The tears came before I could stop them. It was too much information, too much story within another story. I never told you because I thought you didn't want to hear about kids anymore. I thought it would seem like I got over it quickly, but I didn't. I just found a piece of us that was still alive inside me, and I took care of it like it was you. I got up, without feeling my legs. I walked around the house like a sleepwalker. I went back to the living room. I sat down. I took a deep breath. He had loved again, in a different way. He had become a father again, even if we weren't blood relatives. And I was here, still stuck in what was, in what we couldn't be, and in what we let die in silence. The last sentence of the letter completely dismantled me. "If you ever want to meet her, she still asks about you." I showed her your picture, and she said, "She looks like a sad fairy, Dad. Is she magical too?" I closed my eyes and collapsed. What would I do with all that now? Where would I store this new pain, and this new chance to start over? But before I could decide anything, the phone rang, and on the other end of the line, a childish voice asked, "Hello? Is this Clara, the sad fairy?" I was speechless. The phone slipped slightly from my hand, as if my body didn't know what to do with that voice on the other end of the line. It was a sweet, small, hesitant voice, and at the same time filled with an inexplicable intimacy, a child's. And she had called me a sad fairy. Who are you?" My voice came out broken, brittle. "I'm Sophia. Papa Reek showed me your picture. He said you were magical, but you were sad because you lost your wings." My eyes filled with tears. My breathing became heavy. I closed my eyes, trying not to fall apart. Enrique had told her about me. He had created a story where I still existed, even if absent, even if broken. "Where is Daddy Reek, Sophia?" "He went to buy bread, but I found the paper with his number. He said I could call him if I really missed him. I miss him. What about you?" The silence on the other end of the line was almost sacred. I swallowed hard. How do you answer that to a child? I am too, Sophia. A lot. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she asked, "Can you come visit me?" I felt the ground give way beneath my feet. My hands were shaking. My head was telling me it was too soon, but my heart was already on its way. I grabbed a pen and paper and wrote down the address she had recited with her mother's help. It was in a small town, 3 hours away. A road I knew well. It was the way to Enrique's parents' house. I spent the rest of the day crying, remembering and asking questions. Who was this girl? What kind of love did he build there? How did I fit into this new narrative that Enrique created outside of me? The next day before sunrise, I put the notebook in my bag, along with the letter, the photo, and the empty photo frame. I drove for 3 hours in silence, hearing only the wind breathing through the windows. I arrived at the house around 10 in the morning, a modest little house, with a blue gate and flower pots hanging in the windows. And there she was, Sophia, sitting on the porch, wearing a light pink dress and a book on her lap. When he saw me, he gave me a shy smile and ran to the gate. "You really came." I knelt down, surprised at how easily my heart opened to that little girl. She hugged me without hesitation, and in that hug, something inside me broke and remade itself at the same time. "You look less sad in person," she said, looking at me with eyes too big for her small face. I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I really smiled. Sophia's mother, a woman with a calm expression and serene gaze, welcomed me kindly. We talked for hours. She told me how Enrique would come almost every day to pick Sophia up from school, how he taught the girl to ride a bike, how he would read her bedtime stories, and how, in the last few weeks, he had seemed strange, as if he were saying goodbye. It was then that she handed me something that took my breath away, a small, old recorder with a cassette tape inside. According to her, Enrique left a recording there saying that it was something that only Clara could hear. I returned to the car with the tape in my hands, my heart racing and a pain in my chest that mixed longing and anticipation. I placed the recorder on the passenger seat. I took a deep breath and pressed play. His voice filled the car, low, husky, intimate. "Clara, if you're listening to this, it's because Sophia found you. And because even without knowing how, I still believe that part of us survived all of this." My whole body shivered. I know I made mistakes. I know you made mistakes too. But what we lived was real. And even with the silences, with the unspoken screams, with the hidden pain, it was love. Yes, it was. A painful, crooked love, but ours. The recording paused. And if you're listening this far, I want you to know one last thing, something I've never had the courage to tell you or write. The tape started to hiss. The sound disappeared, and with it, the last sentence. I stood there, the tape recorder in my lap, my heart pounding. The tape hissed, repeating the same noise as if mocking my urgency. I had waited days, maybe years, for one last truth from him. And now, just as it began to take shape, the sound evaporated into emptiness. I rewound. I pressed play again. The hiss. Just the hiss. Tears filled my eyes. I tried again and again, but nothing. It was as if fate had decided that I should not listen, that what Henry wanted to tell me, that last thing, would be forever trapped between what was said and what was kept silent. But I wasn't going to accept it. Not now. I went back home. Sophia's mother greeted me with surprise, but she understood immediately. We got in the car and went to the city center. In one of those old electronics stores, we found a technician who still repaired recorders and restored tapes. He greeted us kindly, listening to my explanation without asking invasive questions. He picked up the device, delicately disassembled it, and placed the tape in a more modern system. It could be that the tape was recorded over another one, or that it has been damaged by time. But I can try to extract the sound, if there is still something there, he said, adjusting the cables with experienced hands. I could barely breathe. Every second felt like an eternity. 30 minutes later, he called me. I managed to recover a snippet. It's not much, but maybe it's enough. The room fell silent, and then Henry's voice came, weak, broken, but unmistakable. "Clara, the truth is that I never really left. I carry you with me every day, in the smell of coffee, in the sound of rain, in her name. The audio failed for a second, then continued. Sophia, I chose that name because it was what we would have given our daughter. I never told you, because it hurt too much. But every time she smiles, it's like I see you again, in that yellow dress, dancing in the living room. My knees felt weak. I sat up slowly, as if the world had spun too fast. The name of the daughter we had lost. The name we had chosen one night, lying in bed, dreaming out loud. Henrique remembered, and more than that, he had given that name to the only thing that still connected him to life, to hope, to me. He had kept everything, even when I thought he had forgotten. The tape ended with a long noise, and then a last sentence, almost a whisper. If you have the courage, tell her who you were to me. I left the store in silence. The sky was gray, about to rain, but I didn't feel cold. Inside me, a silent revolution was happening. Something was moving, as if old rubble was beginning to give way to new ground. I went back to Sophia's house. She was waiting for me on the porch, with a new book in her hands. Are you okay? He asked, looking up. I nodded. I think I'm starting to get it. She smiled. A smile full of innocence and acceptance. A smile that carried the name I had buried so long ago. I walked over, knelt down, and looked into her eyes. Can I tell you a story? I asked. You can, she said excitedly, but it has to be one of those magical stories. That is, but it's a true story, about a sad fairy who began to regain her wings after she met a little girl named Sophia. She laughed, embarrassed. Like me? Exactly the same. And then, for the first time in years, I began to tell. About Henry, about the yellow dress, about the sunken sofa, about the balcony, about the silence, about everything. But what I didn't know yet was that Sophia's story held an even bigger secret, one that not even Enrique had time to reveal, and he was about to find me. During the following days, I returned to Sophia's house as if I were returning to my own mirror. Each visit was like opening a new page of our story. Not mine with Henrique, but the one he had started alone. And now, he gave me in fragments through the smile of a child. I began to understand who Sophia was to him. More than a replacement, she was a sweet patch sown with love, where before there was only pain. And over time, she began to call me Aunt Clara, without anyone asking. It was natural. It was hers. And to my surprise, it was also mine. One day, while we were drawing together, Sophia looked up from the paper and asked me, Aunt Clara, why did my father choose me? He smiled, stroking her fine hair. Because you were already his, even before he knew it. She seemed satisfied with the answer. But then, as if hiding a secret too big to keep for long, she whispered, There's one thing I've never told anyone. Not even Mom. My heart raced. You can tell me, Sophia. I promise to keep it safe. She came closer and said, almost in a whisper, Daddy Enrique wrote another letter, but he said it was just for you, and that you had to hide it very well. I widened my eyes. Where, my love? She got up quickly, went to her room, and came back with a small wooden box decorated with shells. She handed it to me with all the care in the world. I kept it under the pillow, just like he asked. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter folded in 3, with my name written in soft letters. I stepped back a little, trying not to cry prematurely. I took a deep breath and read, Clara, if this letter reached you, it's because everything happened the only way it could. With time, with losses, and with choices that still surprise us. I write this letter because I know you are stronger than you think, and because I know that, even broken, you are whole. You always have been. The tears came, hot, silent. I know it hurt. I know you hated me. But I also know that deep down, there is still a bridge between us. Sophia is part of that. She wasn't born from us, but she was born from what was left of the love we had. And I was only able to love her like this because one day, I learned from you how to truly love. There was a smaller envelope inside the letter. In it, a photo. Henrique, Sophia, and an empty space next to them. On the back, he wrote, "You're still missing here, but who knows? Maybe one day you'll smile again on this side." I folded the letter carefully, as if it were made of glass. I looked at Sophia, who was watching me with the most sincere eyes I had ever seen. "Was it magic, Aunt?" I nodded. It was, and it still is. That night, after putting her to bed, I went to the porch of the house, the same one where Henrique used to sit at dusk. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, and for a moment, I felt the wind touch my face like a whisper. There were no more screams, no more heavy silences. There was just a story that had finally been told, in its entirety, with its flaws, its knots, its pauses, and with a list that was no longer of things unsaid, but of things finally understood. I went back inside, sat in the rocking chair, and closed my eyes. Perhaps at that moment, Henry was smiling somewhere in time, and for the first time in many years, so did I. Oh,